This is the Hacking Real Estate Podcast, episode 22.
Just because it seems difficult, don't give up on it. And I'm saying that because right now you're seeing a lot of uncertainty in the housing market, and I feel like the perception is don't even investigate because it's not worth it. And there's this sentiment that home ownership isn't for the next generation. And there are programs that exist if you look for it and if you work with a real estate agent.
If there's a will, there's always a way. And don't let fear be the reason that you don't do it. When I was in a tough situation, the way that I thought about it to get over my fear was, what's the worst that can happen? And if you truly ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen? You'll find that you have to take 7 or 8 worst case scenarios before you even get to that absolute worst case scenario. And in order to get there, so many things have to go wrong. And so purchasing a home is not likely the thing that's going to derail your life. So that would be my best advice, is to really consider, what is that worst case scenario and how many steps is it really going to take for you to get there?
Welcome to the Hacking Real Estate Podcast, where we dive into the stories of seasoned, hands-on, and tech-savvy real estate investors. We'll learn the strategies and tools they use to maximize returns and minimize hassle, all while navigating the rapidly changing real estate market. I'm your co-host, Brandon Hall, and managing partner of Hall CPA, and I'm sitting alongside my co-host, Vikas Gupta, CEO of Azebo. With our combined 15 years of experience in real estate investing and entrepreneurship, we're here to help you up your real estate game. Let's get hacking.
Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of the Hacking Real Estate Podcast. Today, our guests are Andrew Winter and Camala Winter, and they are a husband and wife real estate investing duo based in Ohio and Florida, with properties near Cleveland and St. Petersburg. In addition to his full-time job, Andrew is also working on launching TrueReal.io, a platform to help first-time home buyers and non-corporate investors explore the realm of real estate homeownership and investments. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to be here.
In your own words, can you tell us your real estate journey?
Me first. So I bought my first home in 2016. I was switching jobs and decided it was the time to lay down some roots. And unfortunately, that job no longer existed. So in 2017, I took the opportunity to go down to St. Petersburg, Florida, where I happened to, as a part of the deal I made, I got a bachelor pad, $500 a month, top level apartment studio where I had a waterfront property, like a pool, a workout facility, and it was $500 a month. But as a part of it, I had to put my house up on Airbnb and offer a percentage of those proceeds to the person I was renting from. So that was my first foray in 2017 into Airbnb, where it went absolutely terrible. I mean, it was the worst experience I think I've ever had. I had people smoking marijuana in my house. I had parties thrown in my backyard. I made enemies with both my neighbors. And I promised myself I'd never do it again. But I really liked snowbirding. So the second year I tried it, I made some tweaks and some changes. I found some good people to help me through. And ultimately, that's what started my real estate journey, especially through Airbnb. And I also had the opportunity to purchase an investment property, my first one, where I learned everything there is to know about what can go wrong in a house. We purchased from a hoarder. And then we also did a month lease back where she decided she wanted to not move. And as a part of that journey, the police were called. We had to renovate the entire home from plumbing to electric. So I really got my hands kind of really dirty really quickly into real estate. And that's kind of what propelled me into just continuing to replicate this. So every house I've purchased, I've lived in, and we've ultimately tried to make it a home for those that do call our homes home. And then my wife's story is a little bit different than mine.
Yeah, I guess I got started in 2018 more out of necessity than anything else. 2018, I bought my first house using an FHA loan. So I put 3.5% down, which at the time was somewhere around like $3,000 or $4,000, which is really attainable. And I bought my first home because the next day I quit my job. And in my mind, I was trying to figure out, how am I going to survive renting, because I was renting for $1,100 a month every month with no change in that. So how am I going to survive without stable income? So logically, I thought, if I get this 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, I can rent it out. I can rent out 1 bedroom. I can rent out 2 bedrooms, or I can rent out the whole place. But at least I can guarantee that I can have extra income every month. So it was really more for me to just ensure my livelihood. That house, eventually, I started doing my own coaching and consulting business. And I really just had a really bad string of luck. I just was not going in my favor. I got down to what I call my $11 moment, where I had $11 to my name and had this breakdown where I was like, all right, I guess we're putting the whole house up to rent because I can't afford it. And that just kind of propelled and made my housing, I guess, my situation. I don't know how to say that. I ended up having to just come up to Ohio, live with him, and put my house up on Airbnb to survive. So that's how I got started.
Was that string of bad luck real estate bad luck or non-real estate bad luck?
It was a little bit of both. I had a string of bad luck where I had someone sue me in my home that wasn't necessarily my fault, which was just a really bad situation to start off with. And then on top of that, I was down in Miami doing a coaching presentation, and I was staying in an Airbnb, and a drunk driver, came in and totaled my car in the middle of the night while it was parked in a driveway. And so my car at the time was worth, what the insurance company told me was worth $8,000, and I owed $12,000. And so they really weren't going to give me any money to get a new vehicle. And with $11 to my name, that math was just really not working out for me. So I took the insurance from my car. They gave me a rental for 2 weeks and drove up to Ohio and expedited putting my house on the market.
Where we lived in that second investment property, or the first investment property that I ever purchased, we lived on the 3rd floor without air conditioning with the dog that has separation anxiety disorder. So our beginning was a little bit rough, but ultimately looking back, it's really kind of what's propelled us to be successful in this space. Is we didn't start off with the greatest footing. We didn't have a lot of people come out and offer us a big lump sum of cash to get started in this. We really kind of clawed our way to where we are today.
What compelled you to keep going? Because I always find it really impressive when, people have a few less than stellar experiences with an asset class or investment strategy and decide to keep going with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. When I was 23 and I bought my first house, I had no support at all. My friends all said, why are you buying? It's terrible. Like, what home ownership is like. It's going to be a lot of work. You're going to have to mow the grass. You're going to have to, what happens if the plumbing goes out? What happens if the HVAC goes out? And I was like, oh, well, I'll figure it out. I said, it's an investment. You can invest in stocks or you can invest in real estate. And I said, ultimately, I don't want to pay rent because to me, I feel like it's throwaway. It's less of a hassle because you have somebody else dealing with it if things go wrong. But taking that and moving through the chain, I saw a vision of myself kind of potentially starting up like a winter destinations, which we have a whole ton of puns on our last name for LLCs. It's really easy to do. But I wanted to get to the point where if somebody from the north wanted to come down to the south, there was the ability for them to do so in a space that was friendly and was welcoming for them. And that's ultimately where, when we talk about potentially the Coquina Key or Kingfish House, it was that space. And so I wanted to be a snowbird. I accomplished that at 26. And the only way to do that was to have environments that I knew I could do my professional day job and have a space that was conducive for me being successful with that, but then also potentially using it as an investment strategy. And so we have our primary residence is in Largo, Florida, but we're currently living in my first house that I ever purchased, which is my Dover Center house up here in Westlake, Ohio.
I think my answer is a lot more simple than that. The reason I kept going was, 1, out of necessity, but 2, you have to look at financially what's working and what's not. And when you consistently are seeing income from individual rooms or from a whole house where those numbers are quickly starting to exceed your mortgage, and you start to see that passive income, I think it's a very logical explanation to keep going because those numbers make sense.
And so if you're seeing this, it's analytical mindset, which I'm not. I'm actually a pretty analytical person. But when it comes to real estate, I'm much more emotional.
So I'm curious, what drives the snowbird mentality? Like, why do that?
Compromise.
Definitely a little bit of compromise. So when we met, she lived in Florida, and my stipulation was that I wanted to spend summers at least in Cleveland. And so as we're driving up here, there's actually a story. I don't know if your mom even knows this one yet, but I was in the car when she told her mom the first time she was coming to Cleveland, and her mom freaked out, and it was the greatest like soundbite ever. It was like, Cleveland, oh. And so I was a little hurt because I think that Cleveland is this wonderful like unknown that people just based on the national media don't have an affinity to go there. But I mean, it's beautiful. The weather is consistent. The people are super friendly. And then when you think of Florida, you think of beautiful beaches and anger. So you kind of marry those two together. And if you do it at the right time of season, it's pretty enjoyable.
Again, I'm going to go on the analytical side of that. And first of all, very timely. It's really good to diversify your portfolio because there's these things that happen in Florida that are just unavoidable, such as hurricanes. And if one comes through and wipes them all out, I'm really happy that we have other homes here in Ohio. Outside of that, I think the market in St. Pete will never go away. It's a tourist destination. You're always going to be able to increase your rents. You're always going to have that income. And Ohio is not necessarily the tourist capital of the world. However, with the mass exodus out of New York and out of Chicago, people are really looking for a nicer area to live long term with their families where they can live in the remote environment and get a little bit more bang for their buck. So, and in addition to that, the Cleveland Clinic specifically is really well known in this area. And so we do get a lot of people coming in for longer periods of time that really serve that that mid-length, mid-stay market where you're able to capture people who want to come in for their family relatives or for surgeries or things like that.
Yeah, and your father being an example of that. So,
yeah, I have 3 very good friends, all from California, all who went to grad school in Cleveland. And if asked, if you couldn't live in California, where would you live? They actually are like, yeah, Cleveland would be like a top 2 on my list. So it's there. Like, I guess for people who experience it, it definitely has a draw.
it does. I mean, it's really weird because I tell people in Florida, I'm like, I'm so excited to go back to Cleveland this summer, and their first response is, "Why? Like, what do you possibly want to do up there?" I'm like, it's crazy with the amenities that we have and the distance to drive places. Like, I mean, people here complain about traffic all the time, but it takes you 30 minutes to go anywhere in the city at any time of day, really. So I have no complaints.
If you own rental units but don't want to pay for expensive software, check out Azebo, the smarter way to manage your rental properties. With Azebo, you can automate rent collection, find quality renters, simplify accounting and tax prep, get a bank account designed for real estate investors, and save on rental property insurance. All of these services are free through Azebo. Join thousands of real estate investors who trust Azebo to manage their rental business in one convenient platform. Sign up today at azebo.com/HRE. That's AZIBO.com/HRE.
So fast forwarding to today, what does your portfolio look like?
So our portfolio today consists of, I have purchased 2 homes here in Westlake, Ohio. One was supposed to be our summer home, but due to, again, life situations that we've been conditioned for, we end up moving back into my first home. And then we're under contract potentially to look at a second home that will be our forever summer home so that we're not moving, because it kills one of us every year to be type A and to have to organize and move. And the other one of us just picks up a carry-on and leaves. Yeah. So ultimately, that's where the Cleveland portfolio has kind of been. Ultimately, these houses are homes that I've lived in. I have enjoyed my time in each one of them, and it's exciting to get to share it. And then the Kingfish house, I actually purchased specifically to do that model of, I want people from the north to come down and be able to do vacationing and to feel comfortable doing it. most of the people that go down to Florida, they try to get an Airbnb and they're like, oh, the neighbors are on something, or, I don't feel comfortable with the area that I end up renting, or there's no buses here. How am I supposed to get around? And for us, the intent was we're 15 minutes from the beach. You can have guests come in, we're all from the north. So we know kind of the struggle of trying to get out, but it was really more kind of focused on the communal aspect. And actually now I currently have a group of Clevelanders renting the property from me too. So that's my portfolio. And then I don't know if you kind of want to touch yours.
I guess all in all, we have a total of, I'm going to say 6.5 properties across Florida and Ohio. All of those properties initially started out as Airbnbs and short terms, whether it was rooms or for weekends. And then they slowly moved into that fully furnished model where they were that midterm solution. And one of the things that really helped us propel our properties forward is being pet friendly. So we were able to find a really nice niche. So all of those properties kind of became that midterm solution. And so recently we've converted 5 of the 7 properties into long-term annual contracts. But what's unique about those long-term contracts is they're still fully furnished. So it serves a lot of that customer base where they're coming here for, 1 to 2 years and they don't want to move across country. They want the property already there. So he has most of the properties. I only have 2. So I'm like the small player in this dynamic duo, but I have 2 properties in Florida that one is our primary residence and the other is a full-time long-term rent.
So I have a couple follow-up questions. One, you mentioned that your properties are more competitive when you allow pets. Any nightmare stories from that?
Of course.
Oh, we have so many different nightmare stories, but what is nice though too about our properties that kind of dissociates as well is that we really kind of have focused on being a home, right? And I know that that's difficult to do, but these were our homes. So we've put that kind of effort in to do the small touches that really matter. Whereas like when I go to an Airbnb, usually the walls are white and there's like 1 or 2 photos that you can tell they grabbed from Walmart. It's even more funny when you go into some houses and you can see all the sheets are the exact same, because I feel like there's like a bulk Airbnb store somewhere that somebody buys the same sheets. So our homes are really unique in the fact that we do kind of put in those custom touches that you can tell we did put some energy into it.
Yeah, as far as being pet friendly, some of the challenges that we've had is people don't think to change air filters, for example. So those can get really backed up with pet hair. We have,
Forgot about the husky.
We've had a lot of fun situations, or we've had a dog completely scratch down all of the paint off of a door. And like, you just have to get a completely new door. And I think I've had a lizard, and people have asked me if they can bring their bunnies, and I've had a couple canaries, and I'm like, wouldn't be my sort of pet, but power to you. And ultimately how I think we were able to combat that is we have a really high price point just to filter out some of those people who may not take care of your home. But another way that we structured our payments was that we didn't necessarily charge a high pet fee, and we really reduced that. And that was really attractive to a lot of people of not seeing that massive like $500 pet fee, but rather that fee was really just bundled into the total fee. And the pet fee was like $50 or something. So I think that really helped weed out some of the lesser quality tenants that you want to avoid.
Yeah, and I guess touching on the dog friendliness piece, there is a weird like addendum to this with Florida specifically, and that they actually have, and it's weird. I think there's actually something on the ballot for a policy that they have discriminatory breed specific restrictions. So you can't even have a German Shepherd. But you can have, I think you're allowed to have a Chihuahua, and I think that they're more aggressive, but obviously the damage will be less. And I've been around 3 different pit bulls that I would have no problem hanging out with, but they're on the restricted list. So you have to be very careful about your selection process for dogs, and you have to like kind of ask and pry for information. because if something does happen, you as the homeowner, which unfortunately is a part of Cam's bad story, are responsible ultimately for damages that could ensue from it. So we've looked at like rider policies even, but even rider policies on top of our homeowners insurance don't necessarily cover specific breeds. So how do you account for that? And there really isn't a good answer yet, other than like I've had friends that have to go the route of doing a service animal because they're not allowed to have a specific dog in an apartment complex unless you get it certified as a service animal.
That's very interesting. And I have a short-term rental and am somewhat familiar with all the federal policies related to that type of stuff where, if they just show up with a dog, there's not a lot that you can do.
Yeah, it's weird because I'm like, I have to ask questions. I'm like, okay, just because insurance is asking, like I have to make sure that I'm in compliance with them because if something happens, then I'm ultimately liable. And I've had less positive outcomes with working through Airbnb and their claims process.
So what made you transition to long-term rentals? I mean, it sounds like you guys really got your start with the midterm stuff. So why switch to long-term?
Yeah, when we started with short term, well, mostly me, and then I think we both, for her, she lived in her short term. So it was renting out specifically a bedroom. And then when we did short term in Kingfish, it was also renting out bedrooms. We had 3 bedrooms in the front, and then we lived in the back half. So for us to monitor the situation and make sure the engagement between tenants was up to a status that everyone was comfortable living in, that was pretty easy for us to do. And then the short term I did in Cleveland, I had a really good maintenance process in. I'd also just lived here, so I didn't necessarily need like a maintenance person on standby because I knew that the house would survive for at least a year or two. But once that threshold broke and then you start to see things falling in disrepair, I mean, heck, some of the horror stories we've had with some of our tenants have caused a little bit of damage in the homes that it just continues to build. So when we looked at it, it was just, and then you had the labor shortages and then prices increased crazy. So I moved more to midterm just so that I didn't have the day in, day out maintenance and monitoring of the home. And then from midterm, even we moved into longer term because it was nice to get that consistency in the pay stubs, especially as our jobs continued to change. We had some difficult situations approach. We wanted to know that there was going to be money flowing in case there was a negative event that occurred so we could be more consistent. But also dealing with short term, we found that people didn't care as much about the home they were living in because they were there for a specific event and it wasn't to take care of their domicile. When you move to midterm, they're like, oh, I have to come back tomorrow. Like, I want to make sure that there's not like crap on the table or that I've, not cleaned the premises because then that's something that they have to live in and pay for. So we found that just the quality of tenant we were getting in midterm was better. And then now we've kind of migrated more into the long-term area.
It's also important to note that our midterm strategy is kind of almost like our selection process for our long-term rentals. So it's almost like a way to vet somebody and see if they're somebody that we would like to work with on a long-term basis. And ultimately, to answer your question of why we moved to long-term, it's a question of bandwidth. We're 2 people. We have 7 houses. It's just not in our bandwidth, along with our full-time jobs, to be able to service all of those short to midterm rentals up to standards. So we had to sacrifice a little bit of the extra income to maintain that level of service and quality, but still have the long-term value. And I think what's really helpful to note for the long-term revenue is that we were lucky enough to purchase some of our homes before there was a spike in prices. And so the difference in what the net income we're making is still pretty substantial, even though we're lowering our prices.
And we also focused this on the lens from the tenant side. So if you're looking to move cross country, is it economical for you to look at taking your favorite sofa along, or is that something you sell on Craigslist? So when you're going to rent a house, you're like, okay, well, what's my cheapest option to possibly get started? And it's, hey, let's look at an Airbnb and let's just sell everything we have. And for us, me personally, I've gotten into a minimalistic view because she makes me. But now that I'm in this, it's like we pack up a single Jeep worth of stuff, and then we go down to Florida, and then we're able to start living again. And we're seeing that trend where people are just, hey, I'm selling my sofa, I'm selling my table. Let me just take the personal belongings along with me and start over. And with that in mind, they're not paying these $8,000, moving fees or 10,000, whatever it is. They're able to just come in, use what exists. And for the most part, the upsell for us is, hey, we want to be a long-term tenant. Okay, here's a discount. You now take care of some of the maintenance activities that fall below a specific threshold. And we've already vetted you. And that's even better than getting to the application process where you get 200 unknown people and you have to filter out a list of those individuals where we've already worked with this individual and have a history.
So it sounds like you're managing your properties yourself. So I have a bunch of questions about how you're doing that. Like, how are you finding tenants? Where are you finding tenants? How are you managing the day-to-day? How are you managing the finances? Like, how do you make all that work? Since, as you said, you have full-time jobs and you now have 7 properties to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. We talked about just barely escaping these last 2 years of hurricanes in Florida. And it's been a challenge. I mean, last week we had both of our basements in Westlake flooded. I got 3 inches in one house, a foot of water in the other. And we had a 75-year-old tree fall. We also then had another tree fall during this latest storm in St. Pete. And so what we did was we tried to start focusing around building good relationships with individuals that are going to help move us to that next stage. And that's honestly the initiative that's behind TrueReal, is starting to vet people and understanding who you're ultimately working with. But in this particular instance, we've started working with handy people that we trust that kind of give us, at least a 48-hour turnaround in some of these pieces. And when it comes to the bigger task, we've kind of built a network of trusted vendors that we work with. For the day-to-day, I've sourced all of our tenants, usually using Zillow. And then I've been lucky. I'm not going to lie to you. When I put up a Zillow post for the house in Coquina Key, I got linked up with 5 people from Cleveland, Ohio. And so instantly my heart was just filled. I was like, cool, they're in, right? We also got linked up with a great tenant that existed in our 57th Avenue house. And, we've been fortunate, especially timing and luck. And so we've used Airbnb also, especially in Ohio and VRBO. I've had more success on VRBO personally to bring in tenants for the midterm. And then for most of the situations, like I had one person who was building a house. It was supposed to take 3 months. It took 2.5 years. So they ended up being a decently long tenant. And then we had another family that just moved here and they were looking for a longer term solution. And we just signed them to a 2-year lease. So we've been fortunate to do the conversion and the upsell, I guess, is what you would consider it with our current portfolio.
I think another really strong channel for us of finding tenants has been, I don't think we've said anything, that we're volleyball players. And so there's a huge volleyball community, especially between Ohio and Florida, because there's a lot of Ohioans wanting to come down and train for beach volleyball. And so he's a big fish up here in volleyball. And so everybody knows his name when we come down. Like, he's the place that everyone would just, that was our filter or filler.
Yeah.
So definitely reference in those different community groups is a really good referral process for us. And we've also had a lot of referrals through different agents, through different word of mouth. And I think what's really important about our strategy is when we talk about managing the day-to-day, we really have built those individual, locally sourced individual like companies or people, as opposed to going to a chain. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that isn't the most economical, but what it does is it builds a relationship and it builds credibility. And so even through that referral network, we have people who refer us because they're our plumber, and they're like, oh, I know somebody who has this house for sale, and we just get referrals all the time. So that's never really been an issue of filling a house because we have so many feelers out there.
Yeah, especially in Cleveland. I mean, I've been here for like 15 to 20 years. And in that time, I've developed a large network of people that I can reach out to, and they're more than happy to help. And up here, especially, we definitely try to keep it local. So I even shop at our local convenience store for all the cleaning products that I need, ultimately because I know that I'm supporting local jobs. And so that is a huge piece that I try to do. And we also work with some local real estate agents who might say like, hey, this couple's coming in from Arizona and they're looking at purchasing a house in the next 3 months. They need a place to stay. Is your house available? And so it's those type of connections that have helped us be successful, especially as it relates up here to the north. And we're working on developing that further in St. Pete. I think we've got a great handyman now and some other key contractors that we work with that have definitely kept us successful.
So one thing that I read about, well, you shared with me, is that you two have different investing styles. Can you tell us a little bit more about your each individual investing style and then how you make it work together?
You first, definitely, because mine's embarrassing.
Well, mine's really not that complicated, I don't think. It's a very logical and very data driven approach of simply looking at a house that's more or less move in ready. I like to invest in homes that are in a good area, they're competitive, they may need a little TLC, which makes it less than ideal on on the MLS. People kind of shy away from it because I don't know, it needs new countertops or it needs new floors, but the plumbing's good, so it has good bones. But I'm not knocking out walls. I'm not completely redoing things. It's mostly move-in ready. My general gut feeling on those is if I'm aggressively type A, like I'll just admit that. And if it's up to my standards where I could live in it, then most likely someone else will. And then from there, I do a competitive analysis of how much I would be paying and what that comps in the area could potentially make from a short term, mid-term, and long term standpoint. I also look at longevity. So, is this a market that is a right now property or is it a in the future property? And I'm much more of a right now kind of approach. And so that's where I make a lot of my decisions. And I'm a person who is the qualities and the details. I can take a very simple home and make it really attractive with just tiny details. And I would much rather do that than buy something that needs a lot of work.
Yeah, and I guess I'll give her kudos where it's due. One, her investment was different in that there's the cash out refinance option to then fund your next home. And that's something that I personally don't have the risk tolerance for.
There's no risk. It makes so much logic.
And so I proposed it to her and I said, listen, this isn't something that I personally would do, but this is an option that a lot of investors do use. And if this is a tool you want to dive into, she can. And so the 57th Avenue house, she, like myself, faced a lot of criticism for purchasing that home, but ran the numbers and saw that it was going to make enough to maintain a lifestyle for herself. So she took that with the FHA. And then when she did a cash out refinance, she used the money from the cash out refinance to then purchase our now primary home. And when I looked at that house, I was like, this is not following in anything that I want. And also there were some repairs that needed done that I couldn't necessarily see past. And now with the primary home that we have, I'm truly impressed with kind of where it's been. So I've been pleasantly surprised in both of her purchases.
So I will share those numbers because I think it's so logical. So I refinanced my home in 2020, which made so much sense from an interest standpoint. I took an FHA that I had PMI on, and it was at around 6%. I was able to refinance, get rid of PMI, and get my interest rate to about a 3%, and my mortgage increased by $1. Also, that's my payment for I was able to take out $80,000. And I took $80,000 and reinvested it into this new home where I was able to put 20% down. I allocated $20,000 for repairs. And so I was able to get a really nice home in a competitive market without PMI and put $20,000 into repairs right off the bat and make it amazing for $1.
Yeah, I will say our real estate agent did a wonderful job with the home we did purchase. I think we had 54 competing offers, and ultimately our offer was strong enough to win our now primary home. So the St. Pete market is different. In the Cleveland area, what I've always done, and this also goes into Kingfish, is I've purchased a primary home. So my primary home I bought in 2016. Then I moved down to Kingfish officially by purchasing a primary home. I'd always been a Florida resident, but at this point, when I purchased the home, I was able to use an FHA loan at 3.5% down. Then I looked at getting a secondary home, which I was very fortunate. The mortgage organization that I used gave me a secondary home up in Cleveland, which again was the intent of this purchase. And I was able to get a portfolio loan. So they gave it to me at I think it's 6.5% on a 5-year ARM, which is insane for an investment property. With that, then I was able to get 15% down, and that home was on a double lot, and it was and I've always done the model of a little bit different. I don't necessarily like to leverage. I usually will purchase with hopefully a low down payment, and then I will live in it. I'll make the repairs to it. Usually it's a home that, needs some TLC to it. I've also bought 2 homes of former hoarders. So there's been some clean out that's been involved. Definitely a lot of painting and a lot of details, which I'm not very good at, is a type not A, whatever the other one is. So I'm lucky that I've had, again, a very good handyman team. Also, Cam's mom has pitched in. Our parents have helped us on some of these things. So we've had a really good support system to get these homes into a state that we're very proud of. I mean, even the Kingfish home that was, again, occupied by a former hoarder, we were able to host our wedding rehearsal dinner there. So we had, like, I think 100, 150 people show up in our house, which was incredible. I mean, we got patio lights up. We didn't even know there was a patio when we bought this house. My mom started digging in our backyard and found a patio. So the amount of energy that have gone into these homes has been tremendous. But again, the support that we've had. And then back to my model, I usually always invest with an equity first approach. My mom, I'll give her more kudos where it's due, is always about getting a deal. So when she goes into TJ Maxx or Marshalls or wherever, she's like, oh, it's on sale, and she'll buy. And so I kind of do the same thing when I'm looking at houses. I'm like, nobody else wants it. I think I can make this work. I can spin it. There'll be some equity at the end. So if things do go down, I know that I still have the equity I can ultimately back out of this opportunity. And then I ultimately look for cash flow.
And see, I think nobody wants it. So why would we buy that?
This is where we differ.
So how do you navigate the differing perspectives?
It's funny because it really goes back to how we met, and we both had very different views of not only the world, but lifestyle. And she's kind of more of getting into this homebody approach where, like, I'm even more of like, I want to travel and I want to do things outside. And that really kind of carried over into real estate. She has a different strategy than mine. And ultimately it just comes down to respect. Like, if you show me something and it makes sense, I may not agree with it. There's a recent home purchase where I'm like, this doesn't follow my motto at all. And she goes, well, it makes me happy. And I'm like, all right, that's enough for me. Let's buy it. So I think there's this mutual respect and understanding that we're both intelligent individuals. And we live in a world these days that's very black or white. Like, it's either right or it's wrong. And we live in this world where, hey, I may not understand it, but you're an individual and I respect your decision. And I think it's the right approach.
What you just said about it makes me happy, so we're going to buy it, is why I don't think there's any such thing as a mortgage rate lockdown. I know this is totally changing the topic of the conversation, but it's just such a perfect example of what I argue about. Anyway, the whole premise of, well, I got a 3% rate, I can't sell it because I'll give up my 3% rate, is a fallacy when it comes to your primary residence, because it's like, hey, look, if your spouse is like, we need to go be in that better school district, then guess what? Your 3% rate doesn't matter anymore. All that matters is affordability. It doesn't matter about giving up my 3% rate. Anyway, sidebar, but just wanted to point that out because you just threw that example right out there that a lot of people don't see. They don't get to witness that. They don't understand that.
Yeah, well, and I mean, to add into that, I mean, that's where we've been fortunate. I started my portfolio in 2016. We're at a 4.5%. Hers was what, 6%, you said? And we were able to refinance in 2020 and even purchase. My FHA was a 3.5%, so, or 3.25, which is still astronomically low. So for us, like, we again are locked into a great rate, but that doesn't mean it's not an opportunity to buy, because now that we're looking at a new primary home, it makes it very easy for us to look at, again, low down payment. Now we get to the opportunity to look at, do we want to rent a house that we've declared our own? And now that we know all the ins and outs of the home, maintenance becomes much more easier since we know where some of the pains might be. And so I've had a lot of conversations with people that have looked into getting into rental properties. I'm like, listen, like, it looks fun. It looks great. I'm like, you got to look at some of the horror stories that, of course, we have. But this is your chance. If you find a good home that's attractive and you can afford the down payment, jump into it. Worst case scenario, you sell the house that you have a 3% rate on and you still make some money out of it.
So what does the future look like for you guys next couple of years? How do you plan to grow your portfolio?
We're currently discussing what it looks like. I mean, ultimately, we've talked about kind of doing the vacation model where we try to buy a bunch of homes in cool destinations like Myrtle Beach or Phoenix, where you see a lot of the snowbird population goes. But recently, that's kind of changed with some of the complexities that have come out of COVID. So for us, we're pretty happy with the areas we've kind of decided. Maybe we'll migrate to some new up and coming areas just to kind of stick within the preferences and risk tolerances we've set out. But the question that we've actually faced the last few years is, how do we scale this, right? And I think that's part of the challenge, because we're a husband and wife duo going up against like Wells Fargo that's buying 150 single family homes in Florida. How do you compete at their discounted rate of maintenance and upkeep on a home and still keep that like homey feel and people excited, where I'm not just painting the walls white and throwing up a cute photo? So that's kind of been the challenge of, what's next. And that actually even breaks out into the TrueReal concept of how do you differentiate a good landlord from a bad landlord? And there is no Google review for something like that. You can't just look up your landlord and say, hey, are they good or are they bad? Because ultimately the reason the house is available is because the previous person is no longer there. And is that for a good reason or a bad reason? So the project of scale is a conversation we've continued to envelop, because even with the basement flooding, I mean, my wife and I had to go to Home Depot, drop $500 at Home Depot and grab a sump pump system and start vacuuming the basement. So
never did I ever see myself standing outside of Home Depot at 5:45 in the morning like it was the new Apple iPhone release to get a sump pump.
Yeah, like our excitement is way different than the average American at this point. We're like, I need a sump pump. And you're like, oh my gosh, I found one. Like today I have to go over to Garfield Heights, and we have to get a 3-inch donut that converts to a 1.5-inch pipe for a sump pump inlay, because I was on a 1.25 before. I'm like, are you kidding me? Usually it was tracing like, where's the new Xbox One at?
So when it comes to like what's next, I think for me, and I know that this is, it's a podcast designed to help people, give you tips on real estate, but I do think it's really important sometimes to speak to the fact that money's not everything. And so there's a really big weight given to happiness. And so you have to really think, for me, these houses, we've put in a lot of work in our 20s and 30s to hopefully have that long-term retirement fund, when we're not able to bring in money. So it's creating that passive income that is enough. We don't necessarily need to rule the world, or we don't need to have a huge piece of the pie. We just need to be able to have a sliver that's going to sustain us and provide us the things that make us the happiest. And right now, I think what's making us the happiest is having time back to ourselves, being able to do the things that we've always wanted to do, and having the confidence that we've selected the right team to be able to respond to emergencies, that we can feel happy that we are supporting local, to feel excited that we're able to give somebody quality over quantity.
And ultimately to call it home. I mean, we don't just rent a house, we try to rent a home. We try to fill it with things that make it feel that way too. And I guess even to that point, like the grand scheme of this is that I want to have something to leave behind for my kids. And I'm kind of concerned about what the real estate future looks like, especially when you look at the data. In the 1970s, 1960s, there were less women in the workforce. So your household income was mainly dictated by one of your partners. Now I think the percentage is like 60% of the household income is between both partners. And yet you still see people struggling with getting to home ownership. And so when I think about the future, I think, well, gosh, if we bring kids into this world, what are they going to be able to purchase, right? Are they going to purchase a tiny 400 square foot micro unit in downtown Cleveland, Ohio, with the hope of going into a bigger city? Or are we going to be able to have a portfolio of companies that we might be able to give them a start that, might not be attainable otherwise? And they can then learn about the ins and outs of home ownership, how to change your electrical outlets, how to learn plumbing. And all of this I've had to do is, I think the best way to get into home ownership is to start when you're young. And that's something I wish I had done a little bit more, paid attention to my father's lessons when I was holding the flashlight and not necessarily doing it appropriately. I wish I had focused a little bit more on some of the ins and outs of maintaining a home. And that's what I hope we can pass on to our future generations.
Well, great. Brandon, I think you've said multiple times, right? Like invest with a goal, with a vision for what you want it to mean for your life, not just with like, hey, I want to do more. So I think this is a great place to maybe segue into our closing questions. But actually, before we do that, I'm going to correct myself. Tell us about TrueReal. Give us a plug. What's going on there?
Yeah, the TrueReal plug is that every parcel should tell a story. I mean, when you go in and you want to rent a house, you should be able to know when was the plumbing last updated, right? Has the landlord had a good history of maintaining a quality of life for their tenants? And from there, then you can start to make educated decisions about where you want to live and who you ultimately want to dictate what your home looks like. I mean, if you want a brand new sink and you message your landlord and they say, no, sorry, we don't have any ROI on that. Like, that stinks. Whereas if you have a landlord that really cares about your quality of life, I mean, I've had people before that I've messaged like, hey, how do you like your apartment? And they're like, I'm afraid to complain to my landlord because I'm afraid he's going to raise rent. And there needs to be some type of a rating system or metrics to really help make quality of life across the United States go up. And I think that this is the way to do it. But also you look at the increase in rents over the last, 2 years even, and what are you getting? Like, are you seeing an increase in, the quality of homes for that premium price you're now paying? Or are you still paying for the same apartment and just getting the increase in terms of the cost? And I don't necessarily think that that's fair. And so there's got to be some type of metric to either help reduce rent or to increase the quality of life. And that's the premise behind TrueReal, is to bring fairness, transparency, and equality into real estate.
Cool. And that's TrueReal.io, right? So if people want to check it out, they can go there.
Correct. TrueReal.io, and we're working on the early stage development of it as we speak.
Awesome. Well, that sounds really cool. I've been fortunate in my life renting from owners who lived in buildings, but I've heard plenty of horror stories from friends. So
yeah, I've had a few, and that's ultimately what caused it. I mean, like cockroach infestation for 4 years, if you can show that history, and with the current metrics you look at online, that same apartment complex has a B+ rating. And I'm like, there's no way it should be a B+ with the quality. But you look at the rating system, the people paying the bill for the rating system to exist are the apartment complexes. And so they're not going to go out and willingly give a apartment complex a negative review.
Great. We have 3 closing questions that we like to ask all of our guests. So if you're ready, we'll dive into it.
We're ready.
Question number 1. What is your favorite book? And it doesn't have to be real estate related.
I have read this book 5 times, and I read it when I was a 5th grader. It's called The Firebrand by Maren Zimmer Bradley, and it's basically the Helen of Troy story told from a different perspective of a fake, or not a fake, but a twin sister that doesn't actually exist in Greek mythology.
And mine, I can't remember the name of it, but it's about jobs to be done. And so while you may look at something at face value, what is ultimately the reason that somebody is choosing to purchase or utilize your services over somebody else's? And it may be less than what you think it is, or it may be more, right? And so when we look at even our portfolio, we've seen things that we never thought people would use our homes for being utilized. I mean, I once had a film crew in my home. And never in a million years would have expected that would be a type of clientele that I would get. And the Jobs to Be Done book was a really cool learning experience.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Jobs to Be Done framework. We use it a lot here at Azibo. Question number 2, what is more important to you in investing in real estate, appreciation or cash flow?
Ooh.
That is hard.
For me, it'd probably be appreciation of value, because I'm buying homes specifically at a discount to ultimately increase the value to something that a couple would look at this and go, oh my gosh, this home's perfect and I want to buy it. And when we purchase it, unfortunately, it's not like that, which I know that one of us isn't necessarily thrilled with always living in project houses. But
I think mine is cash flow, because I'm right now, and I also know that I have that option to sell long term, but for right now, where can this get me? And tomorrow's never promised.
Cool. I like the decisiveness. We get a lot of wafflers on this one.
yeah, well, you can see we're different again.
Yeah, I mean,
Yin and yang.
And then our last question, are there any final pieces of advice that you would like to leave our audience with?
My ultimate advice would be, just because it seems difficult, don't give up on it. And I'm saying that because right now you're seeing a lot of uncertainty in the housing market, and I feel like the perception is don't even investigate because it's not worth it. And there's this sentiment that home ownership isn't for the next generation. And there are programs that exist if you look for it and if you work with a real estate agent. I know specifically in Cleveland, Ohio, if you make, don't quote me on this, but if it's $70K or $68,000 a year, you can qualify for a homeowner's discount program where you can get a low down payment to be able to purchase your first home. And if you don't know of these programs, or if you don't ask somebody about these programs, then home ownership does seem unattainable. Also, FHA gives you the opportunity for 3.5%. It's definitely going to be a little bit more difficult because there's less homes that will accept it, but it makes homeownership attainable. And I've seen a lot of people that don't even get started in it and then pay rent, and then it doesn't appreciate into something that's an asset that you can then transfer or have and leverage in another home purchase. So definitely get started, definitely reach out. I mean, we have conversations with friends all the time that ask about becoming a landlord or looking at buying their first home. And I hope that this is the encouragement for them to start doing it. I know that this podcast is set up on that, and I appreciate it.
I guess mine would be, if there's a will, there's always a way. And don't let fear be the reason that you don't do it. When I was in a tough situation, the way that I thought about it to get over my fear was, what's the worst that can happen? And if you truly ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen? You'll find that you have to take 7 or 8 worst case scenarios before you even get to that absolute worst case scenario. And in order to get there, so many things have to go wrong. And so purchasing a home is not likely the thing that's going to derail your life. So that would be my best advice, is to really consider, what is that worst case scenario and how many steps is it really going to take for you to get there?
Great. Well, thank you both so much. I think this has been an amazing episode. I really appreciate your candor, especially when talking about some of your personal differences about the way you approach things, because I know that those things can sometimes get tricky. So thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. We appreciate it. It was a pleasure meeting you both.